going to do a brief introduction of Misty. Misty Flowers is a member of the Santee Sioux Nation of Nebraska and is currently the executive director of the Nebraska Indian Child Welfare Coalition, which is an indigenous-led nonprofit organization. She's been there since July of 2018. You want me to read the whole thing, or do you just want to jump into your presentation?
Thank you.
Okay, sorry. Prior to that, she was the director of the Dakota Service Unit, the Social Services Department for the Santee Sioux Nation for 12 years. For her tribe, she's administered the Child and Adult Protective Services, Indian Child Welfare Act, Independent Living, BIA Social Services, Native Employment Work Program, AmeriCorps, Tribal Youth Program Grant, and the Domestic Violence Sexual Assault Program. Misty received both of her degrees from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. That's a bachelor's degree in Human Resources and Family Sciences in 2001, and a master's degree in Sociology in 2006. She has been recognized as a champion of change by the White House and has been recognized with the Early Achiever Award from the University of Nebraska Alumni Association in 2013, and the DV program received an award from the Crime Commission in 2012, and was inducted into the University of Nebraska Jackie Thank you. Multicultural Center Wall of Fame. So I will turn it over to Misty.
Thank you. I literally just flew in from my rest, but just driving, trying to get here. Things are always crazy busy in our work. Doing as much as we possibly can. I had a really busy day yesterday, and then didn't even have time to run payroll and do all that kind of stuff. So I was working with my strategy and development director this morning to get that stuff done. So I was running a little bit late today. But today we're going to talk about historical trauma and resulting social issues. This is actually a presentation that we do with Nebraska DHHS ICWA advocates. So you're hearing exactly what they receive on the child welfare side of things. So I don't think there's anybody in here that possibly could have heard this already. We actually just did this presentation yesterday. Kirby Williams and I. Kirby is our she's working on a trafficking project with us. We're not going to worry about the pull everywhere stuff today, just because today is a shorter presentation, because this is actually a 3-hour presentation. So like she said, my name is, well, I always introduce myself in my language. I say Ampet to Washte, Chante Washte Nape Shizaki, Ampa Omeni Moja Devie, now Washichi, Misty Thomas Flowers, Amapia.
We'll see you later. Already.
Thank you. So I introduced myself, and my Dakota name is Ampo Miniboja, which translates to Misty Dawn. I am a member of the Santee Sioux Nation and the executive director for the Nebraska Indian Child Welfare Coalition. Like she said, prior to my coming to NICWIG, I worked for my tribe for 12 years. That's Kirby. She's our tribal trafficking resource specialist for NICWIG. She's also working on getting the Nebraska Tribes Addressing Violence Coalition going as a nonprofit. We've been working with her on that as well. And so, usually when we do presentations, we do a land acknowledgement, and regardless of where we're at on what we call Turtle Island, we are on indigenous land. And so this is a map that shows, gives you an idea, a really rough idea of the tribes and where tribes are located. I actually have a better map than this. But prior to colonization, there was approximately 10 million indigenous people. I mean, there's different numbers. That was probably about the best number I could find. We're going to talk about what are the terms to use when talking about our population of people? There's a better map if you want that one. Yeah, it is kind of blurry.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
This is just a little bit better map to show, you know, a little bit in more detail who the tribes are and where the tribes are located. Does anybody know what are the 4 tribes in Nebraska that are headquartered here in Nebraska? The 4 tribes. Ponca, Omaha, Ho-Chunk, good job. Even though you were loud and you were late. Because he said Ho-Chunk, he did not say Winnebago. That is the Winnebago tribe of Nebraska. And he said Ho-Chunk, and he got it right. Thank you. What's the other one? Santee. Thank you. My turn. So, I'm going to give you like a brief. This is really, really brief because we're talking about hundreds of years of history. And so, by 1650, the native population had declined to less than 6 million due to war, disease, centuries of persecution and discrimination. And genocide continued then through boarding schools, the Indian Adoption Project, restriction to reservation, and the relocation project. There's a lot of history that goes behind, you know, how we got to where we are today. And some people think like that's not, you know, that was a long time ago. The reality of it is it wasn't that long ago. My oldest sister, well, you know, like boarding schools exist still today, but the shift, there's been an idea shift behind them, where there's, it's no longer about taking culture away, it's about putting culture back. I was actually just I was listening to, there's the Native American Commission, and they have traveled around and they're doing listening sessions and they're doing presentations, and today it was on education. And you know, they have representatives there from the BIE schools, and that's exactly what they're talking about, is putting culture back into our schools. But you know, a long time ago, those boarding schools were the complete opposite. It was all about taking that culture away, stripping us of our language, our spirituality, what we looked like, how we dressed, I mean everything, all of our identity. And you think about cultural identity and how important that is. And you know, one of the things that I realized probably a few years ago when I was doing a presentation with Judge Runke, Judge Patrick Runke with the Winnebago tribe. We were doing an IPA presentation together, and he said that was the idea of the time, was they thought they were doing something good. And that helped me to understand and realize that, and look at it from a different perspective, trying to look at it from a different perspective, but yet, you know, and so what we know too is that a lot of indigenous people, not just here in the United States, but all over, anybody that has gone through forced genocide, forced acculturation, the results are the same. And so that's really what the boarding schools were about. And so this picture here, this is the same man, this is the same person, 6 months later, and these are the same children 6 months later. So I don't know if you can see that well enough. What do you see? What are some of the differences in those pictures? Hair, clothing. And that might be, you know, some people talk about like the look on their faces. Down here, you can see that this is actually, these photos are courtesy of the Army Signal Corps, which is interesting to me. It kind of brings up like a lot of mixed feelings, because now, like, fast forward to today, like my daughter's in the Army. She's a combat medic in the United States Army, stationed in Fort Bragg. So a little bit more about the history. In the United States, it was called the Indian Adoption Project. In Canada, it was called the 60s Scoop. This is a picture, this is a paper clipping, because their goal was to adopt our children into non-native homes. And again, it was about putting, it was about that acculturation and that they thought they were helping our children. I mean, there is a lot, like I said, there's so much history here. Have you guys heard of Baby Veronica? That's actually a picture of Baby Veronica. That was a case several years ago. That was a big case, which you also may know that the Indian Child Welfare Act is under, it's being contested at the Supreme Court level. We're waiting on that ruling to come down. This is actually one of the press releases from the BIA. It was again about the adoption of Indian children. They were talking about the number of Native children that were available for adoption and how many had been adopted by 172 American families. Well, this is like a really quick video. It shows how that loss of land. You gotta look at it. I don't think there's any sound to this. It's only a minute, like minute 70 or minute 27. So it shows that, so the blue is that loss of indigenous Indian homelands from 1776 to the present. When it's done here in about a minute, it'll show like present day reservations, which when we're talking about, like Indian country, when we say Indian country, it really gets into a jurisdiction, like we're talking about jurisdiction. And that's, when we say Indian, like that's the terminology that is used in federal Indian law. So you'll hear that terminology. It's just like the Nebraska Indian Child Welfare Coalition. We really struggled like with our name. Like, what are we going to call ourselves? That even though we disagree with that term Indian, but it's the terminology that's used in the Indian Child Welfare Act, and that's what we are. That's our primary mission. So that shows, and I have another video here too, of the land that was left. So this is what we consider to be modern day Indian country. And so all of the little spots of red is what we have left in terms of land and, like I said, this talks, we really start to get, when we use that term Indian country, we're talking about jurisdiction. But that gives you an idea. And when we talk about, native, working with native populations, traditionally speaking, we were all really connected to the land and the area where we lived. Geographically, everything that our subsistence was from the land. And so, that alone was traumatic to our people, where they could no longer, feed their families and provide for their families. Everything that we used the land. Does anybody know how many federally recognized tribes there are in the United States? A? 0 to 50? Any other thoughts? Shout it out, don't be afraid.
I'd say D.
B?
D.
D. Okay. B?
I'll take C.
D was the closest. Nobody has said E. The answer is E. It's over 500. We're at 574 federally recognized tribes. Though that doesn't include the ones that were exterminated. There were tribes that were 100% exterminated and were wiped out. Like and there were some that, you know, a few members were left. I remember hearing a story of where there was a tribe out in the eastern United States where there was one member left. So you can imagine the trauma, you know, of those tribes. But these are the ones that are left. Of the 574 federally recognized tribes there are, every one of them has their own language, culture, traditions, but also laws, law enforcement, courts. Some of them are a little bit different. For example, the Ponca tribe of Nebraska, and I remember when I was, I don't remember how old I was, but in the early 90s when the Ponca tribe of Nebraska regained their federal recognition. And the Ponca tribe of Nebraska is a little bit different in comparison to the other tribes in Nebraska. They don't have a land base per se, but they have service areas. So they have service areas where they serve areas of Nebraska which cover pretty much all of Nebraska and a little bit beyond, like Winnipeg or Sioux City, I believe Council Bluffs. So it extends a little bit beyond the state of Nebraska. And another, you know, interesting facts is when they, because some of our tribes got moved here. The 4 tribes that we have here in Nebraska were not the original tribes that were here. There are a couple. So like Ponca and the Omaha tribes were originally here. My tribe and the Ho-Chunk, we were moved here. We were moved here in about 1866. And they put us, like our tribe, they put us on Ponca land. And the Winnebago, they put them on Omaha land. And I really feel like that was a part of their extermination, like we're gonna take each other out, kind of a thing. It's kind of my theory. So present day population, this is for the 2010 census. It shows, you know, like the percentage or the per capita. So you can see in Nebraska, we're in like the 1 to 2%. As you get further north, probably because nobody wants to live there because it's so cold, and you know, it gets to be more like 10 to 25 or 25 to 90%. We are still about that, I believe. I want to say it was like 2.4% for 2020 in Nebraska. Just to show like how, you know, the percentage of the population. This is a good map because it shows the state of Nebraska and the counties, and where we have some counties that are like in that 10 to 49.9%. Thurston County, where the Omaha and Winnebago tribes, they are at 50% or more. Here, this is where my tribe is at in Knox County, where I believe at, I think it's 10 to 49.9%. The colors are a little bit hard to read, but I would say that's probably about accurate. So what constitutes a Native American? Like I was saying, like we have, you know, I talked a little bit about our connection to land, culture. We have our people and governance. Like I said, we have our governmental structures. I like this table because it goes through each one of the terms. So like, you know, like, cause what do you call us, right? Like, are we, and you've probably heard me say indigenous, native, Indian. Kind of using all of the terms interchangeably. So this is ideally, it would be good to call us by our actual tribal affiliation. But you also have to remember that there are, it's like our governmental names. So like I said, the Santee Sioux Nation, but to us, we are Dakota. But we were, you know, it's Isanti Dakota, but our official government name is Santee Sioux Nation of Nebraska. The Winnebago tribe of Nebraska, the Omaha tribe of Nebraska, Ponca tribe of Nebraska. Those are our official government names. But we have, you know, how we refer to ourselves. If it's always best, if you're talking to an individual, like, you know, to ask them, you know, how would they prefer to be called? What is their tribal affiliation? Some of them, but be honest with you, some of them may not know. I remember working here at the Lincoln Indian Center during my undergrad, and I worked with the Native youth here in Lincoln. And a lot of our kids didn't even know like what tribe they were from. And so I would try to help them figure it out. And well, they would say, well, I think I'm Cheyenne. I'm like, okay, northern or southern? They're like, I don't know. I'm like, well, where's your family from? Well, they're from Oklahoma. I'm like, okay, well, you're probably southern. You know, or northern Ponca, southern Ponca. There's southern Ponca in Oklahoma as well. But anyway, Kirby put this table together. You can see, like, when she introduces herself, she'll say she's a citizen of the Cherokee Nation, because we have, I guess, what you would call dual citizenship. We're citizens of our tribal nations, and we're citizens of the United States. We're citizens of the state of Nebraska. And so, but, you know, to distinguish that importance of we are citizens of our tribal nations. You know, some people say, like, you know, well, that's not fair. Like, you know, the Indians, they have the Indian Child Welfare Act, and that provides them additional support and protection under that Indian Child Welfare Act, and that's unconstitutional. But we are citizens of tribal governments. We are indigenous people of this land. So that's why it's important to distinguish that we have tribal citizenship. You know, like I said, indigenous, we, native people, non-native people, you can use that term, refers to original inhabitants of this region or land. Most acceptable when referring to the group overall, fine to use when referencing an individual, a tribal affiliation is unknown. Another one that's not really on here is American Indian, Alaska Native. Like in terms of, you know, census, they use that term, American Indian, Alaska Native. So like when we have to check a box, you know, because we like to put people in boxes. You know, we have to check a box. It's American Indian, Alaska Native usually. Sometimes they'll put, you know, space for tribal affiliation. Also Native American, Natives, Indian, like I said, Indian, we use that term primarily because that's what's in federal Indian law and policy. Anybody have any questions about that?
I was wondering about the Alaska, you said Alaska Native, is that what they're called?
Mm-hmm.
Is that what they call themselves, Alaska Natives? Are they because they live in Alaska?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I guess it's a comment on that, where you talk about Indians, and that why they use that is because that's how it was written in the treaty.
Right.
As Indians. It didn't say Native Americans or indigenous, it just said Indians.
Yeah, yeah. That's very true. And like when we talk about, like, you know, healthcare, education, Like that was all a part of those treaties that were written years and years and years ago. But that's how those treaties were written. In order for protection under the Indian Child Welfare Act, the Indian Child Welfare Act was passed in 1978 in response to the number of children that were being removed from their homes. At that time, it was 25 to 35% of all Native children were being removed from their homes and 80% of those were put into non-Native homes. That didn't include those that were at boarding schools. And so like at the time, it was, some communities had very few children left. And so in response to that, the Indian Child Welfare Act was passed in 1978. A child must be a member of a federally recognized tribe or eligible for membership in a federally recognized tribe and the biological child of a member of a federally recognized tribe. That make sense? So they have to be enrolled or eligible for enrollment with a federally recognized tribe. Otherwise, ICWA doesn't apply. These are some definitions of historical trauma and intergenerational trauma. Dr. Maria Yellowhurst Braithwaite, she's done a lot of work in this area, and she's got those definitions. I can probably get this posted to the app so that you all have this presentation. But so like I said, I was saying, like a lot of people think that this historical trauma happened a long time ago, so it's no longer relevant. But what we know is that when there's that trauma that happens, it can be passed on through our DNA and our genes, and also results in cognitions, negative beliefs about the world, and low self-efficacy, and then also emotional patterns of communication, empathy, emotion regulation, and then the behavior could be like child abuse, neglect, also substance abuse issues, mental health issues, and we're going to talk about all of those. And then which, it goes on to that second generation trauma, and third generation trauma, where it's trauma that creates more trauma and more trauma and more trauma. And I mean, literally, like we get to be the experts in trauma because we live it. And when I talk about that, like, I mean, really, literally, like, like our generation, we're trying to heal from historical trauma so that we're not passing it on to our children, but yet we're still living in it. And we're working in it, right? Where we see, some of the families that I've worked with, it was like, man, I don't know what to say. Like, I have no words because it's trauma after trauma after trauma. Families that dad was in prison for sexually abusing his daughter. Daughter commits suicide. Daughter had to have an abortion because he got pregnant. And she eventually succeeded with that suicide attempt. Multiple siblings, mom, suicide attempt after suicide attempt. Fast forward to today, dad's out of prison. One other daughter died in a car accident. And grandma is now raising her 2 children. It's trauma after trauma and stuff. It's like we live in it. It's every day, it's all the time. Like, it seems like funeral after funeral, and those things are hard, it's tough, it's traumatic. This was really, like, Kirby covered this. She's got the master's degree in psychology. So I do find that how trauma affects the brain to be very, very interesting, but I don't feel like I can talk about this, so I'm going to skip through it. I like this, what she had added on here. You are healing 500 plus years of colonization. Be gentle with you and with each other. And I friend, I did we have a series called In the Sweetgrass. Lenny Hayes, he did a In the Sweetgrass with me, so you could follow us on social media. He could listen to Lenny talk about it. We had him on in celebration of Pride Month because he identifies as a gay male and as what we call winkta. But he also said this, and he also alluded this, to this, like we are healing from 500 years of colonization, that forced genocide, forced acculturation. So take care of yourself, you heal yourself, because you then will be able to help others. There are definitely some of the physical symptoms and emotional and psychological symptoms of trauma, including tension, stiffness in muscles, aches, pains, easily started and difficulty calming back down. Just trying to remember that word, hyper. Sorry, I can see it. Fatigue, insomnia, feeling on edge, difficulty concentrating, breathing, avoiding eye contact. So you think about some of the youth and families that you work with, and how often have you seen some of these symptoms? Some of the emotional and psychological symptoms: shock, denial, disbelief, confusion, difficulty concentrating. We had a presentation the other day with the Supreme Court Commission, and they talked about the importance of having children in court. I know that's probably, should be a typical practice on the juvenile justice side of things, but it's not always a practice with, on the child welfare side of things. So, they talked about how important that is, because even if, they were like, well, we don't want them to miss school. Well, even if they are in school, do you think their mind is really in school? No. Let's help them to maybe understand what's going on in the world around them and how it affects them, rather than what we think is trying to protect them, because it's not really protecting them. Of course, there's a lot of studies about adverse childhood experiences, and in general, what we know about adverse childhood experiences in any country is that we generally have higher adverse childhood experiences. Those adverse childhood experiences that would include any type of abuse, household challenges like domestic violence, substance abuse, mental health issues, parental separation, divorce, incarceration of a parent. So generally speaking, the number of adverse childhood experiences that our population has is generally higher than the rest of the population, which of course we know then has that adverse effect later on in life that causes a lot of health issues and shorter lifespan. Keep saying I want to add in like how that expected lifespan compared to non-natives, how that compares. But that's something I need to add into this presentation. But of course we know that adverse childhood experiences affects all of these different systems, and we've got these systems that are moving, and a lot of times when they get caught up in one system, they're caught up in another system. Like we have dually adjudicated youth, but they're still trying to go through school, and they may have mental health and substance abuse issues, and their interaction with the medical and public health system. Generally speaking, we know that students with 3 or more ACEs are 2.5 times more likely to fail a grade, score lower on standardized tests. Today they were talking about if they are behind 2 years or more, it decreases that chance of graduation by a lot. So So like I said, we have trauma that creates more trauma and more trauma and more trauma. We have drug and alcohol abuse, child abuse, sexual abuse, domestic violence, unhealthy relationships, anger. They're angry and they don't even know why. There's unresolved grief, inability to love. And so with all those systems I was talking about, we're only treating the symptoms of historical trauma and intergenerational trauma. There's a video that I often share when I'm doing training. It's called Journey to Forgiveness. And it talks about like angry and don't know why. Like there's a lot of, because it's passed on from generation to generation to generation. And a lot of unresolved grief. There's a woman on there that talks about she never heard her mother say, "I love you." And yeah, I mean, like, it's like I look at all of this, and it's real, and I don't know how to like explain that. And a lot of times I share like my own story of, like growing up, my mom was an alcoholic. She quit when I was like around 5 or 6, but yet she still had a lot of those. She was trying to heal herself. Her addiction switched to gambling and domestic violence. That's why I was born in Alaska, but we came home when I was 3 because of the way my dad treated my mom. And at the time, it was like, at a time when it wasn't a police issue. She still suffers the physical effects of domestic violence, like with her back, and like it's like. Trying to help my sister write a letter because she's trying to get a job, and I'm like, you need to talk about that personal experience, because she hinted at it, but I'm like, it's real, and I'm trying, like even though she's my older sister, I'm trying to help her heal and help her because she has a lot to offer the world, because this is lived experience that we have. She had it more than I did because she's older than me. And, and so it's like, I mean, even, sexual assault, like, so my mom had 3 girls, and then there's her, right? And so the statistics are like 1 out of 3. In our family, it's 4 out of 4. Survivors of domestic violence as a child, as adults, like, it's just constant and consistent. It's like, and then like she has 5 girls. 2 of them are survivors of sexual assault. And so she's had to help them through that. We're gonna make that struggle into a strength. And so she's, we're right there. And like I said, it's our life. It's like that's what we live. I might go through some of these statistics like really quick, and we're making good time. So suicide rates, like I said, we have like the highest rates in pretty much every social issue that you can think of. Suicide, this is from 2010, and this is youth suicide. And I would say that, it's not just our youth, it's our adults as well. I mean, just thinking about our small community within the last few, last year, I can probably think of at least a handful. And I'm not on the front lines anymore at home. So there's probably, I'm sure, those were the ones that were, I don't like that, the completed, I guess, the completed suicide. So it's not just our youth, it's our adults as well. But if this is ages 15 to 24, we can talk about all of the health disparities as well, all the things that contribute to health disparities, including poverty, low educational attainment, low literacy, unemployment, language barriers, unequal access to health care. So you've heard me talk about the Indian Health Service. IHS provides that free health care, because like I was talking about the treaties. So the treaties long ago, and this is something I always feel like it's, I admire the strength and how they looked ahead. Our people looked ahead. Our tribal leaders at that time looked ahead. And so they said, okay, well, in exchange for our land, because you're gonna take it anyway, you will provide education and healthcare and food to our people. So that is why we have Indian Health Services, Bureau of Indian Education. These are federal funded programs that provide healthcare for free to our people, including mental health care. But they also have very, very limited budgets. They're doing the best with what they can. It's really, really hard to get a referral out. So like if you need more than just the standard medical care, like chances are you're not gonna get it, you know. And I don't wanna like talk bad about IHS either, because I know that they're doing the best that they can with what they have. But unfortunately, it's deeply underfunded. We have, you know, I can talk about how our, you know, our bodies were not acclimated to the food, but also alcohol. You know, our bodies were accustomed to a certain type of a diet that was very, very high in protein. And so when they introduced like the starches and sugars to our diets, horrible detrimental effects to our people, and which we're still struggling with. Like, you know, that it really contributes to a lot of the health disparities that our people have. Diabetes, heart disease, all of those diseases and things that are attributed to being overweight and obese, cardiovascular disease. You know, and a lot of times when you compare like the various populations, the American Indian Alaska Natives and African Americans, you know, were like right there, right next to each other. So in terms of like even health disparities. Like I was saying, mental health issues, again, you know, have some of the highest rates in comparison with other populations. I want to kind of skip through some of this because I want to talk about what are we going to do about it. But I do want to, like I mentioned, the introduction of alcohol, our bodies were not accustomed, didn't know how, I can't remember the scientific term that is used, like the thing that our bodies lack that makes it where we can't process alcohol like other populations. And so alcohol was new. Mostly new to all of the tribes. There were some tribes that did have alcoholic beverages or mind-altering substances, but it was mostly in the Southwest, and it was used for shared spiritual experiences. The most common one that people know of is peyote. I've never done that, like, so I can't speak on that. But when alcohol was later on introduced after colonialism, it was new to most tribes. And it was also very different and more potent. It was used in trade, and so all of that was compounded by Indian removal and relocation, boarding schools, reservation life, poverty, and other forms of genocide. You know, so a lot of times what we saw, like when they were coming home from boarding schools, they didn't look like, couldn't communicate with the rest of their tribe, their families. There was a lot of issues there, and so like where they didn't feel accepted or like they didn't fit anymore. But yet, you know, you take somebody that looks like me, put them into non-native society, you don't really fit there either. And so a lot of times, you know, a lot of things that they learned in boarding schools was the child abuse and sexual abuse that they had experienced there. So where do you learn to parent? From your parents, right? And that's how they were parented. And so like they didn't know how, you know, how to be a parent. That's what they learned, and so a lot of times that's what they, how things were. So of course it was all compounded by the introduction of alcohol, and of course later on other substances. Of course, substance abuse rates are of some of the highest, but also in comparison, we have the highest rates of abstinence, meaning no alcohol at all. So it's either one or the other. Having an in-between is really difficult. Personally, I'm thankful that my mom got sober when she did. You know, because my other aunts and uncles, like, they were all working on sobriety around the same time. Two of them, you know, like, it was like during, you know, like after Vietnam. So like, we got several Vietnam vets in my family. And they talk about that, you know, like that was how they coped when they came back from Vietnam. You know, like I was talking about domestic violence, sexual assault rates. At least 55% of Native women have experienced rape or violence by an intimate partner. On average, on some reservations, Native American women are murdered at a rate more than 10 times the national average. You know, and all of these, and I hate like talking about like we're just statistics, right? Because honestly, like this is real life for us. You know, I was talking about, you know, sexual assault. 4 in 5 Native women experience domestic violence, and 1 in 2 experience sexual assault. You know, so I gave like that, I mean, a comparison within my own family, like, you know, like how that compares to some of these statistics. Just know, like, we have really high rates of domestic violence, sexual assault, and it seems like it's generation after generation, which also contributes to missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. We also, now it's more recognized as MMIR, missing and murdered Indigenous relatives. You know, all of those things contribute to our, you know, not only all the things that I've talked about, but also like the commercialization, sexual exploitation of Native women, you know, all of those things. And but also what I would say about this is that this is nothing new. Like this has been going on within our population for years and years and years. And I talked about how we got to, prior to our being brought to Nebraska in 1866, we were imprisoned at Crow Creek and Davenport, Iowa, and up in Minnesota. And every single time, you know, every place, there's stories within our history of how women had, you know, how they were treated, how they survived, how they made sure that their children survived. For food, they, you know, and some of them did what they had to do for survival. Some of them, you know, that victimization has been there for a long time, but it is finally gaining recognition of what it deserves. Because our women are still being victimized at higher rates, and some people think, oh, well, that's not Nebraska, that's it somewhere else. Nebraska is ranked 7th in the highest in the number of cases of all in the U.S. Omaha, Nebraska is ranked 8th for cities in the United States for number of missing and murdered. So we've got about 8 minutes left. So what can non-Native advocates do? What can we do as you know, service providers, Native and non-Native advocates? What can we do? So I have a list here. I also do some work like with the education system. That's why it says educators equal innovators. But I'm always an advocate for thinking outside the box, because what's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting a different result. I also did a presentation on like the linear versus circular. And our linear world, which is, you know, that's what we know, like that's how these systems are built. You know, where everything is left to right, top to bottom, there's a hierarchy, and these systems are built, and eventually they will fail. And how many times have we failed as juvenile service system, child welfare system, education? You know, all of these systems are linear systems. And I'm not trying to like talk bad about any one of those systems, but what can we do differently? Those systems are hard to change. And so I always think about, you know, what can we do differently to better serve our young people? You know, I hear like, this says act as a relative. Some native service providers, mental health, substance abuse providers, they don't refer to them as clients. They refer to them as relatives. This young relative, I have an appointment with a young relative. Understand, be patient, be consistent. Advocate in a manner that respects and validates individuality, experience, decisions, and strength. Act as a relative. Promote learning about Indigenous people, Indigenous languages. That video that I was talking about also talks about how culture is a protective factor. And so we should be trying to, you know, that really, you know, what we see is there's like the colonization, the post-colonization, and the mental health issues that exist because of it. And then how we, you know, we see a cultural resurgence. And that cultural resurgence is what's going to help our people heal and to overcome these things and to be able to help each other and to maybe get to a place that's healthier and happier and, you know, is a good place for our people to live. So, you know, with that, you know, I know like a lot of times they've got to have case plans. I don't know what you call it, like on the juvenile services side of things. What was that? Treatment plans. How much of our culture can be incorporated into that? You know, we have, there are some programs that are out there that are culturally based. There are native service providers that are out there. It is hard, they are kind of hard to find, but they are out there, they exist. So incorporating culture into those plans, whatever plans it might be. Stop talking and listen. I thought that was really interesting. I was also listening to a court hearing on my way in because I'm a QEW on a court case in Douglas County. And the mom had an adjudication hearing today. And so I got on that as well. I'm horrible, you guys. I need a driver. I need a driver. But they would not allow the mother to talk. And I was getting frustrated. Like, let the mom talk. She's telling you, these are the services that I've been trying to access. I'm having a hard time. They did acknowledge that active efforts need to be met, but yet they kept cutting her off. Let her talk. Oh. Learn as much as you can, more than what you learned in school, because we all know like this stuff is not taught in school, right? Not at all. Think outside the box. Don't try to fit students or our young people into a box. Expand your worldview. Celebrate the triumphs of Native Americans today. I think it's awesome. You know, when I get on social media and I see, like even this, like having that material printed. Like, do you know how awesome that is? Like, to be able to buy this material at a usually, like, I think I got it at Holidays actually. Doing all kinds of awesome things. I would also add, support your local native nonprofits. Like I said, I can get this added to the website. This is a pretty good video on Native American communication styles and how our communication is different from like the modern day, how we're different in communication. So I know we're like almost out of time, but does anybody have any burning questions?
So Misty, as you've mentioned trauma, and it's kind of a personal question for you, but maybe the thought of, say, most indigenous people. What do you do that's healthy, that helps you combat the trauma you've experienced? And the question might be a little bit broad, but what would be the suggestion, certainly for kids, that would help them process that trauma? And I guess I'm asking even more on maybe a more spiritual level, if that makes sense.
That does make sense, and I was just trying to figure out, like, how do I tell you this? Like, how I personally, like, have gone through my whole own healing journey has been through language, relearning my language. Like, culture has always been an important part. I mean, I was fortunate to have been raised in it most of my life. I moved to Lincoln, where I lived down here for 11 years, and I wanted to go home because I needed to be closer to my people, to our culture, because there's constantly things happening on the cultural side. A lot of times it's figuring out how to manage those things. Spirituality, and whatever that looks like for, every tribe is different. We have our own spiritual practices. But it's a way of life. It's not just something that we do on the weekends or, once a week. Like, it's all the time. Like, I'm trying to figure out, there's ceremonies going on back home this week, and I'm supposed to be down here all week, and I'm like, well, I can drive home and then drive back. That's
If you
3.
had a driver.
I need a driver. I would say, the other things, education definitely, that was a part of my healing journey as well, because I learned about these things. I didn't know about historical trauma. Even though I've lived it my entire life, I didn't know what it was. So learning about it, being able to acknowledge it within my own family, and how it's affected me and how I grew up. But those were the main things, was like culture, language, spirituality, even powwows, dancing. And I've said there's a few places where I can find my true peace. And that's within our spiritual, our spiritual realm, or in the powwow arena. But there's contact information, our website, like I said, we're on social media as well. This is, like I said, this is a DHHS presentation that we do for their IPA advocates, so it has their contact information as well. But thank you so much, I appreciate you listening.